The hum of the newly installed Tesla Powerwall in Alex's garage was a sound he'd come to associate with progress, with modern living, with finally cutting down on those ever-rising electricity bills. He'd spent weeks researching the best installer, ensuring every wire was precisely where it should be, every bolt tightened to perfection for his gleaming Model 3 that now sat plugged in, silently charging. It was a testament to his meticulous nature, a sanctuary of efficiency and quiet pride. But that quiet pride was about to be shattered, not by a faulty circuit, but by a force far more volatile. His neighbor, Brenda. Brenda, with her perfectly manicured lawn and even more perfectly calibrated sense of outrage, had made it her personal mission to scrutinize every new addition to Alex's property. The moment the sleek black charging station went up, she'd begun her campaign. "That thing is a fire hazard, Alex. A ticking time bomb. You're going to burn down the entire block," she'd shrieked from her meticulously trimmed azaleas, her voice cutting through the peaceful evening air like a siren. It was a bizarre, unfounded accusation, yet it became her relentless mantra. She'd hover at the edge of his driveway, a clipboard often clutched in her hand, scribbling notes, muttering about municipal codes and insurance liabilities. Alex had tried reasoning, had offered to show her the certified installation documents, had even pointed out the fire safety ratings of the equipment, but logic simply bounced off Brenda's unyielding conviction. Her eyes, usually narrowed with judgment, would widen in a theatrical display of alarm whenever he approached, as if he himself were a walking inferno. The tension in their quiet suburban cul-de-sac became a palpable thing, a thick, suffocating cloud hanging over barbecues and dog walks. Alex, a man who cherished peace, found himself constantly on edge, the sound of her approaching footsteps enough to clench his jaw. He'd seen her talking animatedly to other neighbors, gesturing wildly towards his garage, spreading her unsubstantiated fear like wildfire. He'd brushed off the initial incidents as mere neighborly eccentricity, but then the official-looking envelope arrived, a stark white rectangle resting ominously in his mailbox. It was from the HOA, a formal complaint citing potential fire, hazards, and community safety concerns, directly referencing his unapproved Tesla charging apparatus. Brenda had escalated, and Alex knew, with a sinking feeling, that this was far from over. The HOA complaint was merely the opening salvo in Brenda's escalating war against Alex's Tesla charger. What had started as verbal jousting quickly devolved into a full-blown psychological assault, each day bringing a new, more insidious tactic from the meticulously infuriating neighbor. Alex found himself caught in a bizarre, one-sided rivalry he never signed up for. His peaceful suburban life replaced by a constant state of low-grade anxiety. He'd wake to find aggressive, anonymously typed notes taped to his mailbox, each one detailing a new hypothetical fire hazard associated with his unlicensed electrical monstrosity, signed only with ominous fire emojis. One morning, he discovered a crude, hand-drawn diagram of his house ablaze, flames leaping from his garage tucked under his windshield wiper, a chilling, almost deranged piece of art. He debated calling the police, but what would he say? "My neighbor is sending me creepy fire drawings?" It sounded unhinged, even to him, and he worried it would only fuel Brenda's narrative of him being the unstable one. The rumors, too, began to circulate like poison ivy through the cul-de-sac. He overheard snippets of conversations from behind hedges, whispers about Alex's death trap, and how it's only a matter of time. Children playing in the street would sometimes point at his garage, mimicking the sound of sirens, a clear echo of their parents' whispered fears. Brenda had become the neighborhood's self-appointed fire marshal, holding impromptu safety briefings in her driveway, complete with dramatic hand gestures towards Alex's home, recounting fabricated near misses and exaggerated surges. Alex, ever the rationalist, tried to counter her irrationality with facts. He printed out the charger's safety certifications, the installer's credentials, even a detailed explanation from the Tesla website about their advanced battery management systems. He invited the HOA president, Mrs. Gable, over for coffee, hoping a calm, informed discussion could quell the storm. Mrs. Gable, a sweet but easily swayed woman, listened politely, nodding as Alex explained the rigorous safety protocols. But then Brenda emerged from her house, seemingly by coincidence, watering her prize-winning petunias directly within earshot, her gaze fixed on Alex's garage with an almost manic intensity. Mrs. Gable visibly stiffened, her eyes darting between Alex and Brenda, and soon made her excuses, leaving Alex feeling like he'd been sabotaged. The subtle harassment began to morph into something more unnerving. One evening, as Alex was watching TV, the lights in his living room flickered erratically, not just once but in a series of sharp, unsettling blinks. He checked his fuse box, then the main breaker, finding nothing amiss. A few nights later, he smelled something acrid and metallic lingering near his garage, a scent that made the hairs on his arms stand up. It wasn't smoke, but something deeply unpleasant, something that hinted at overheating circuits or melting plastic. He scoured his garage, his Tesla charger, his power wall, but found no visible source. The next morning, the smell was gone, leaving him to wonder if he'd imagined it, if the stress was getting to him. Then came the incidents that truly unsettled him, pushing him past annoyance into genuine alarm. Late one night, he saw a fleeting shadow dart from the bushes at the edge of his property line, disappearing into the darkness. He dismissed it as a stray cat or raccoon, but the next morning, his motion-activated security camera footage showed a brief, grainy clip of a figure, too indistinct to identify, lurking near his Tesla charger for mere seconds before vanishing. He rewound the footage, zoomed in, but it was useless, just a ghostly blur. It was unsettling, the feeling of being watched, of his personal space being violated. He upgraded his security, adding more cameras, but the unease lingered. The confrontation that followed was less of a confrontation and more of a chilling revelation of Brenda's unraveling psyche. Alex was pulling out of his driveway when Brenda, seemingly materializing from behind her rose bushes, stepped directly into his path. Her face, usually pinched with indignation, was contorted with a strange, almost ecstatic fervor. "You think you're safe, don't you, Alex?" she hissed, her voice a low, raspy whisper, completely unlike her usual shrill tones. "Playing with fire. Ignorant. Don't you know what happens to people who invite disaster into our homes?" Her eyes, usually just judgmental, now held a disturbing glint, a wild, almost unhinged light that sent a shiver down Alex's spine. He tried to remain calm, to respond with logic, but her words were nonsensical, veering into dark, almost prophetic warnings that had nothing to do with electrical safety and everything to do with a deeply disturbed mind. She spoke of cleansing, fires, and repaying karmic debts, phrases that made no sense in the context of a Tesla charger. As he slowly drove around her, carefully avoiding eye contact with her intense stare, he saw her pull out her phone, not to call someone, but to take a quick, furtive picture of his charger, a twisted smirk playing on her lips. It was then that Alex knew this wasn't about a neighbor's concern for safety, or even a simple HOA dispute. This was an obsession. Brenda wasn't just worried about a fire. She seemed almost to be waiting for one, anticipating it with a disturbing zeal. The air around her felt heavy, charged with a strange, dark energy. Alex returned home, his hands trembling slightly, the serene hum of his Tesla charger now seeming ominous, a magnet for his neighbor's deranged fixation. He felt trapped, cornered in his own home, knowing that Brenda's campaign wasn't just a nuisance, but a looming threat to his peace of mind and, perhaps, something far more sinister. He spent hours researching legal options, feeling increasingly desperate. He even considered taking the charger down, cutting off his nose to spite his face, anything to make Brenda stop. The silence of his neighborhood, once comforting, now felt like a taut string waiting for the snap, waiting for Brenda's next move. He just didn't know how dramatically that snap would come. The night it happened, the air was thick with an unnatural stillness, the kind that precedes a storm, or perhaps something far worse. Alex was just drifting off to sleep, the low thrum of his Tesla charging a familiar, comforting sound when a distant, crackling roar pierced the quiet. It wasn't the usual suburban night sounds of crickets or far-off traffic. This was something primal, terrifying. A strange orange glow began to bloom through his bedroom window, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. He bolted upright, his heart hammering against his ribs, a sense of dread seizing him before he even registered what he was seeing. He rushed to the window, throwing back the blinds, and the sight that greeted him stole the air from his lungs. Across the street, Brenda's meticulously kept house, the very symbol of her pristine, judgmental existence, was engulfed in a raging inferno. Flames, angry and insatiable, devoured the manicured hedges and clawed their way up the perfectly painted siding, their orange tongues licking at the night sky. Smoke, thick and black, billowed upwards, carrying with it the sickening scent of burning plastic and synthetic fibers. The irony of it hit Alex like a physical blow. Brenda, who had tirelessly, obsessively, declared his home a fire hazard, because of his Tesla charger, was now watching her own house burn, a roaring testament to the very destruction she had so vehemently, almost prophetically warned against. For a fleeting, dark second, a surge of grim satisfaction shot through him. A primitive, almost shameful thought. Karma, he mused, is a swift and brutal mistress. But the dark satisfaction quickly curdled into a cold, knotting unease. This wasn't just a fire. This was a catastrophe. The heat radiating across the street was intense, even from his vantage point, and the sound of cracking glass and collapsing timbers was horrifying. Neighbors, drawn by the terrifying spectacle, began to spill out of their homes, their faces illuminated by the inferno, their collective gasp of horror echoing through the street. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer, a cacophony of urgency slicing through the night. Fire trucks, their lights flashing a frantic ballet of red and blue, soon converged on Brenda's property, hoses snaking across the asphalt, streams of water hissing into the hungry flames. Alex watched, mesmerized and horrified as firefighters, in their heavy gear, battled the blaze, their figures silhouetted against the blinding light. He saw Mrs. Gable, her face pale and streaked with tears, being comforted by another neighbor. The usual gossipers stood in stunned silence, their hushed whispers replaced by a genuine, shared dread. Nobody seemed to know if Brenda was inside. The suspense was agonizing, until a few minutes later an ambulance sped away, lights flashing, a sign that someone had been rescued or recovered. The hours that followed blurred into a surreal nightmare of hoses, steam, and the acrid smell of burnt remains. By dawn, Brenda's house was a skeletal ruin, a charred monument to its former self. The roof was gone, the walls blackened husks, and the air still carried the metallic, burnt stench of recent destruction. As the fire was finally brought under control and the hoses began to be coiled, official vehicles started to arrive, police cars, and then a sleek, unmarked SUV. Out stepped a man in a dark suit, carrying a heavy briefcase, a grim expression. On his face, he was a fire investigator. Alex, along with a few other neighbors, lingered, watching the investigators pick through the rubble. He saw the suited man bending down, examining something closely near what remained of Brenda's garage, then looking up, his gaze sweeping across the street, lingering for a fraction of a second on Alex's house on his visible Tesla charger. It was a glance that sent an unexpected chill down Alex's spine. Later that morning, after the crowds had thinned and the forensic teams were packing up, Alex found himself standing near the edge of the police tape, a morbid curiosity drawing him closer. The fire investigator, a stern-faced man with tired eyes, was talking to a uniformed officer. As they parted ways, the investigator happened to walk past Alex. Alex, unable to resist, managed to ask, "Any idea what caused it, sir?" The investigator paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at Alex, then glanced pointedly at the charred remains of Brenda's garage. "We're still processing, of course," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But there's an odd electrical signature, and a concentration of a rather unusual accelerant. Not your typical house fire, son. Not typical at all." His eyes met Alex's again, a hint of something unreadable in their depths, before he turned and walked away. The words echoed in Alex's mind. Odd electrical signature, unusual accelerant, not your typical house fire. The initial satisfaction he'd felt, the cruel irony, vanished completely, replaced by a cold wave of dread. Brenda had claimed his Tesla charger was a fire hazard, a ticking time bomb. Now her house was a burnt-out shell, and the fire wasn't. Typical? A chilling question began to form in Alex's mind, a question he desperately didn't want to ask. What if Brenda's obsession with fire wasn't just paranoia? What if her unhinged warnings, her strange pronouncements, weren't just the ramblings of a difficult neighbor, but something far more deliberate, far more sinister? He looked at his own Tesla, silently charging in his garage and then across the street at the blackened ruin. The loop had tightened. This wasn't just about a charger anymore. This was about a horrifying possibility that linked Brenda, her obsession, and the very act of destruction she had so vehemently attributed to him. He felt a deep sense of unease, realizing that the fire hadn't closed the chapter. It had just opened a much darker, more complicated one. The fire investigator's cryptic words, odd electrical signature, unusual accelerant, gnawed at Alex like a persistent itch. The initial relief that his charger wasn't implicated, the dark satisfaction of ironic justice, had curdled into a chilling suspicion. Brenda wasn't just a nuisance. Her obsession had taken on a terrifying new dimension. He couldn't shake the feeling that the fire wasn't random, that it wasn't just karma. He felt compelled to investigate, not for vengeance, but for the unsettling truth that lingered in the acrid air around Brenda's charred home. His subtle investigation began with what little he knew. He started with the HOA, subtly asking Mrs. Gable if Brenda had a history of similar disputes, or if there were any records of her previous properties. Mrs. Gable, still shaken by the fire, was initially hesitant, but Alex's earnest concern seemed to soften her. She mentioned, almost offhandedly, that Brenda had moved to this neighborhood relatively recently, about 5 years ago, after a difficult situation at her previous residence. Something about a dispute with a neighbor over renovations, Mrs. Gable vaguely recalled, and then some sort of fire at that house too, I think. Nothing major, just a small kitchen fire, but Brenda always made a huge fuss about it. This was the first thread. Alex spent hours online, searching public records, old news archives, anything that might link Brenda to past incidents. It was painstaking work, but his persistence eventually paid off. He found a local news snippet from a small town in Arizona, dating back about 6 years. The headline was innocuous: "Small fire damages Scottsdale home." But the address matched Brenda's previous residence. The article mentioned a dispute over a pool installation with a neighboring property owner and a minor electrical fire in the kitchen. The police report, a public document he managed to dig up, noted cause undetermined but suspicion of faulty wiring. The details were thin, but the pattern was alarming. Neighbor dispute, minor fire, electrical suspicion. It was too coincidental to ignore. This wasn't her first rodeo. His next lead came unexpectedly. While walking his dog near Brenda's property, now a gaping, fenced-off maw of destruction, he noticed a man in a rumpled suit meticulously taking photos of the debris. He introduced himself as Dave, a claims adjuster from Brenda's insurance company. Dave was gruff, but a flicker of something, perhaps frustration in his eyes, made Alex push. "It's a complicated one," Dave sighed, rubbing his temples. Brenda's been very difficult, demanding. And the fire, well, let's just say the official cause is still under investigation. For a reason. There are some discrepancies. Alex pressed him gently. Discrepancies? Dave lowered his voice. Look, I'm not supposed to say this, but the way that fire spread, the points of origin, it just doesn't track with a simple electrical fault. And that accelerant the fire department found, it wasn't something you'd typically find in a residential garage unless you were planning to start a fire. High-octane stuff. And Brenda's claims, they're exorbitant. She's pushing for a full rebuild, arguing negligence from your end, actually, insisting your faulty Tesla charger caused a power surge that somehow jumped the street. Alex's blood ran cold. She was trying to frame him. This wasn't just obsession, it was malice, a calculated attempt at ruin. The loop tightened into a suffocating knot around Alex. It wasn't about safety, it was about Brenda's own dark agenda. He recalled her wild eyes, her muttered prophecies of cleansing fires. It wasn't a warning, it was a twisted promise. He decided to visit the local library, poring over old town archives, local historical society documents. He was looking for any record of Brenda, any deeper root to her disturbing behavior. He found nothing in the local archives of this town, but a passing comment from a helpful librarian, an elderly woman named Martha who had lived in the area her whole life, sparked another lead. Brenda? Martha mused. Oh, yes, she's the one. Who used to argue with old Mr. Henderson down on Elm Street. He had that lovely antique shop, you know. Before she moved here, Brenda bought his old car, a classic, and then claimed it caused her garage to nearly explode. Demanded he buy it, back or pay for damages. He refused, and she threatened to make him pay. Then, wouldn't you know, his garage caught fire a few weeks later. Just a small fire, but it forced him to sell the shop. Martha frowned. Mr. Henderson was a good man, said she was unhinged. Alex now had a chilling pattern, a history of escalating disputes, followed by suspicious small fires, and always Brenda demanding compensation or attempting to shift blame. She wasn't just unhinged, she was a serial arsonist, or at least a highly manipulative individual who used fire as a weapon or a tool for profit. This wasn't divine justice, it was a carefully constructed scheme. He felt a profound sense of danger. If she was willing to burn down her own house and frame him, what else was she capable of? His phone buzzed. It was an anonymous text message, a picture of his Tesla charger taken from an unusual angle. Close up, almost as if someone had been standing right next to it, inside his garage. The message beneath the photo simply read, "Next time, it won't. Be a warning." A cold dread washed over Alex. Brenda was not just unhinged, she was actively targeting him, closer than he could have imagined. He wasn't just a potential victim of her blame game, he was now explicitly in her crosshairs. The loop had closed around him, and he was no longer just an observer, but a direct target in Brenda's twisted, fiery game. The anonymous text message, the close-up photo of his Tesla charger inside his own garage, shattered any lingering doubt. Brenda wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a meticulously deranged individual, a calculating arsonist who was now actively stalking him, planning his downfall. The realization hit Alex with the force of a physical blow. She had likely been inside his garage perhaps multiple times, gathering evidence, planting seeds of her twisted plan. The odd electrical signature and unusual accelerant from the fire investigator's comments now clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't an accident or even simple karma. This was a setup, an elaborate, fiery frame designed to destroy him. Alex's unease transformed into a cold, hard resolve. He couldn't wait for the authorities to piece together Brenda's history. He had to act. He began by reviewing every minute of his extensive security camera footage from the past few weeks, meticulously scrutinizing every shadow, every flicker of movement. It was a tedious, mind-numbing task. But the image of Brenda's face, contorted with that unhinged zeal, spurred him on. Days blurred into nights as he sifted through hours of mundane recordings. Then, in the pre-dawn hours of one particularly tense morning, he saw it. A brief, almost imperceptible glitch in the feed, a flicker of static that lasted less than a second, occurring exactly 2 nights before Brenda's house fire. He rewound, played it back frame by frame. Just before the static, a faint, almost ghost-like reflection appeared on the polished surface of his Tesla, a distorted, fleeting glimpse of what looked like a dark, hooded figure. And after the static, the image subtly shifted, a faint impression. On the garage floor where there had been none before. It was too slight to be conclusive, but it sparked a theory. Brenda, obsessed with technology and surveillance, might have been trying to disable his cameras or jam their signal while gaining access. Armed with this unsettling suspicion, Alex reached out to Dave, the insurance adjuster, under the guise of inquiring about Brenda's claim. He subtly steered the conversation, asking about the unusual accelerant again. Dave, clearly frustrated with Brenda's outlandish demands, confided that the lab analysis had come back. It was a highly specialized industrial-grade ignition enhancer, not something a homeowner would casually possess. "It points to deliberate intent, Alex," Dave had said, his voice grim, "and it points away from an electrical fire. The evidence, combined with her past claims, is making her a prime suspect. We're building a case for insurance fraud and possibly arson." This was the leverage Alex needed. He didn't directly accuse Brenda, but he planted the seed of his own recent discovery. "You know," Alex said, trying to keep his voice casual, "I've been reviewing my security footage and I've had some odd glitches, almost like someone was trying to tamper with the signal." He paused. "Or perhaps someone was looking for an opportunity to get close to my charger." Dave's silence on the other end of the line was deafening, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "I'll be right over," he said, hanging up abruptly. The next few days were a whirlwind. Dave brought in an independent digital forensics expert, who, using advanced software, managed to recover small corrupted fragments from Alex's camera feed. They found evidence of a localized signal jammer being used near his garage at the time of the flicker, and then a series of high-resolution stills. The images weren't perfect, but they clearly showed Brenda, cloaked in dark clothing, manipulating something near the base of Alex's Tesla charger. In one chilling frame, she was attaching a small, almost invisible device to the wall near the outlet, something designed to mimic an electrical fault, while simultaneously igniting a small, controlled accelerant on her own property moments later. The odd electrical signature the fire investigator mentioned was Brenda's deliberate manipulation, a smokescreen to frame him, while the unusual accelerant was her tool for controlled destruction. Her motive wasn't just spite, it was a desperate, elaborate insurance fraud scheme, coupled with a twisted desire to destroy Alex's peace and property, driven by a deep-seated, pathological obsession with control and blame. The small kitchen fire from her previous home, the garage fire of Mr. Henderson, they were all part of a pattern, escalating acts of calculated arson. The climax arrived swiftly. Armed with Alex's footage, Dave and the local fire department presented their findings to the police. Brenda was apprehended, not at her burnt-out shell of a house, but attempting to file yet another, even more outlandish insurance claim. The news spread through the cul-de-sac like wildfire, this time a literal one. Neighbors who had once whispered about Alex's supposed fire hazard now exchanged stunned glances, their earlier judgments replaced by a palpable sense of horror and profound relief. Brenda, revealed to be a serial arsonist and an insurance fraudster, was taken into custody. Her attempts to feign outrage and innocence quickly crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. She was subsequently institutionalized, her actions attributed to a severe psychological breakdown fueled by obsessive-compulsive tendencies and a dangerous delusions of persecution. The irony was devastatingly complete. The woman who cried "fire hazard" the loudest was herself the arsonist, not just of her own home, but of a pattern of destruction. Alex watched her drive away, the flashing lights of the police car a stark contrast to the burning embers that had once been her home. The neighborhood slowly began to heal. The charred remains of Brenda's house eventually cleared, a new, safer property taking its place. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, but for Alex, the experience left an indelible mark. He still drove his Tesla, still charged it in his garage, but the silent hum of the Powerwall now carried a different resonance. It was a constant reminder of how close he'd come to being wrongly accused, of how quickly an innocuous object could become the focus of someone else's terrifying delusion. He had a profound sense of relief, but it was mixed with a lingering unease, a chilling thought about the unpredictable, often dark nature of people. He had survived not a fire from his Charger, but a fire started by a human mind, a mind that had declared war and nearly succeeded in burning his life down, all because of a perfectly safe Tesla Charger. He had faced a kind of fire that no extinguisher could douse, a human blaze of obsession and malice that had scarred his quiet suburban street forever.